Saturday on Radio 2.
It's 1980. Early morning on Saturday, the 19th of July, Sue Clavey and Barry Hunt are getting ready for their wedding. The weather is looking good as friends and family members gather for the celebrations. But this is not the start of our journey. For that, we need to look further back in history to learn how our parents get together.
Bless 'em all, bless 'em all, bless 'em all, the long and the short and the tall.
1940, and a 20-year-old Sergeant Ron Clavey is in North Africa with the First Army during the Second World War. He was part of the crew on a lightweight universal carrier, able to rapidly transport machine guns and soldiers.
You'll get no promotion this side of the ocean, so cheer up, my lads.
Ron was born at the Old Cottage, Station Road in Angmering, West Sussex, on Tuesday the 29th of June 1920. When he was born, his parents, Herbert and Daisy, already had two sons, the eldest, 10-year-old Herbert, named after his father, but known as Bert, and 6-year-old Jack. Having completed an apprenticeship, Herbert became a journeyman carpenter, working for a single employer. The family moved to another part of the village at 10 Lansdowne Road, where Ron grew up. Ron's childhood was happy and full of love, but he never had many toys and Christmas was never really celebrated. From a young age, he vowed that when the time came, his own family would always enjoy the festivities. Like many boys his age, Ron spent a lot of time outdoors with various consequences. He remembered once standing with his kneecaps poking through a garden gate when he was bitten by a tenacious bulldog. He enjoyed swimming, and for a full year, cycled every day to Littlehampton to swim in all weathers. As well as winter swimming, Ron and his friends enjoyed skating on Angmering's frozen pond. It was quite safe for children growing up in the late 1920s to play in the streets near their homes, as cars were rarely seen. Although he and his friends would play cricket during the summer, his greatest passion was football. Ron played for Angmering Football Club, and it's believed he once had a trial for Arsenal. He was, nevertheless, a lifetime supporter of the Gunners.
Now I think it's time you really did meet the Arsenal. Not exactly in the normal setting, for at the moment, with manager George Allison and trainer Tom Whittaker, they're down at Hove, working up the cup-tie spirits. So come on, Arsenal. Girls, don't you think they're beautiful? If they do that to Bolton, the opposition will just fade away. But as always, the game's the thing, giving socks to the old ball that has to stand the racket wherever they are. So maybe you've seen the cup winners, and maybe you haven't. But one thing is certain, they know what to do with the ball.
When Ron was transferred to the 8th Army in the Italian campaign, he had been demoted to Lance Corporal for some misdemeanor. At some stage during this time, he was injured when the carrier he was riding in overturned. The injuries he sustained were serious enough for him to be sent back to England.
So them glamorous nurses looking after you, you lucky blighter.
That's great.
I reckon you're trying to work your ticket.
In 1941, 20-year-old Mary Rawlinson had qualified as a state-registered nurse. Mary's parents, Cecil and Charlotte Rawlinson, married on the 24th of October 1917 at the parish church in East Haddon, Northamptonshire. At the time of their marriage, Cecil was working as a butler in a house in Marylebone, London.
The butler, an integral part of any self-respecting English upper-class home. Someone who symbolized the image of service, of a time gone by, a world where people knew their place, and when serving others was a privilege and a vocation.
As a married couple, Cecil and Charlotte were able to offer their joint services as butler and cook. They took up posts at one of the large houses in Lower Beeding, a village a little over 4 miles from Horsham in West Sussex. The couple moved into Siswood Cottage, and there Charlotte gave birth to their only child, Mary. Like so many in service, they had to relocate to where work was offered. Sometime after Mary's birth, they worked for Lieutenant and Mrs. Parry, living in at Hook Hall in Uckfield, East Sussex. Charlotte taught Mary to read and write at an early age. Mary attended Uckfield Primary School and joined in with village life, winning first prize for her doll costume in the fancy dress competition in Uckfield's Carnival. Although she sometimes was allowed a friend around to play, she mostly had to play on her own as she and her parents were living in someone else's house. When Charlotte and Cecil's job at Hook House ended, some of Mary's childhood was spent in Sturminster Newton, Dorset.
Here is a bridge at the pretty little village of Sturminster Newton in Dorset. Treat it with respect, for as this warning notice tells the world, anyone damaging it is liable to transportation for life. This caution is a relic of the days when transportation was a regular punishment for many minor offences.
Upon leaving Sturminster Newton, the family moved to take up yet another position, working for Mr. Adams at Ropley House, a large Georgian house in Hampshire. Although she was unhappy leaving her friends behind, Mary soon made new ones when she joined the local Brownie troupe. The 1939 census showed that once she reached 18, Mary was employed there as a housemaid. She recalled that each night she would climb the back stairs to her bedroom with only the light from a candle to guide her. Mary always said that the outbreak of the war spared her from following her parents into domestic service. Her life was to change forever when she was welcomed into nursing on the strength of her Red Cross membership. Mary's long career in nursing began during the war, when she started her training at the Royal County Hampshire Hospital in Winchester.
First, you must learn nursing. While you're learning, you're paid. The job is interesting and there's plenty of companionship. And the most satisfying job of all, healing.
Despite a shortage, the nursing profession was determined to continue improving the quality of nursing care by further regulating training. A nurse's life was subject to a plethora of rules, all of them strictly enforced.
Surgery has advanced in 20 years. The sufferings of the wounded are reduced to a minimum by the care of the great medical service of Britain.
Mary was stationed at the Alton Isolation Emergency Hospital in Hampshire when Ron arrived for his treatment. She said that she first sighted him when, although concussed, he got out of his wheelchair to open a door into the hospital. During Ron's time there, they became firm friends. Once he returned to active service, they exchanged letters. In one, Mary wrote,
"Dear Ron, many thanks for your letter. I was pleased to hear from you, and hope you enjoyed your leave. I must admit I felt very envious. I wonder where you are now. You have probably almost forgotten a lot worse. Well, Ronnie, I shall be interested to hear how you are getting on, and I wish you all the best, and perhaps we will meet again someday. Cheerio. Mary."
Mary and Ron certainly did meet again. Ron was awarded 28 days army leave from Graz in Austria so that he and Mary could be married. The wedding took place on Saturday the 3rd of November 1945 at St. Peter's Church in the Hampshire village of Ropley. A brief seaside honeymoon followed at Pontin's holiday camp in the Welsh town of Prestatyn, before Ron returned to Austria.
At the end of the Second World War, at least 40 million people around the world had been displaced from their home countries, with about 11 million in Allied occupied Germany.
Is the job of denazification, on trial or awaiting trial before special German courts, are some 2 million indicted Nazis. Penalties for the guilty range from long terms at hard labor for the worst offenders to fines for those less culpable.
By December 1945, Ron's company had been posted to Graz in the Austrian Tyrol. There, they oversaw the repatriation of displaced enemy personnel. The task was administered from the British Army offices in the former Taubstummen Institute, a school for the deaf and dumb, which throughout the war had been the barracks for Germany's feared SS. As the repatriation program neared its end, in July 1946, Ron was one of the depleted staff who continued to supervise the civil censorship program. He looked forward to his demobilization and the return to England and his new bride. Ron was demobbed from the army in August 1946. He and Mary started their married life at Flat 2 Finchley Hall in London, but chose to have their baby born at Alton General Hospital in Hampshire, closer to Mary's parents, Cecil and Charlotte Rawlinson, who lived next to the blacksmith's shop at 44 Broad Street, Alresford in Hampshire.
In 1947, Brian was the first of the Clavey children to arrive. Babies born between 1946 and 1964 were known as boomers.
On the 30th of June 1939, Bill Hunt had just turned 20 when he attended his Royal Air Force medical at the Drill Hall in London. Bill was born in Dublin, Ireland, on Saturday the 17th of May 1919. His father, Herbert Hunt, was 23 and his wife-to-be, Clara Cox, 25, when they married at Northfield St John Church in Ealing, West London, on Wednesday the 22nd of May 1907. They lived at 18 Dudley Gardens in Ealing. There they had Cecil, the first of their 5 sons, born on Wednesday the 22nd of April, 1908. Herbert was unhappy working as an office clerk, and the family looked to Ireland as a place where they might prosper. He was offered a job there as a land agent, so the family, armed with an inheritance, took the Holyhead steamer to Dublin.
By 1911, the family was living at 47A Sandy Cove Road in Kingstown. In 1909, Bernard, known as Terry, had been born. Gwendolyn in 1912, and a third son, Francis, in 1916.
Herbert was an ambitious man. By 1919, when Bill was born, he had used his inheritance to start his own business. After securing dockside rights in Dublin, he started importing tea, then coal. With an increase in wealth, Herbert immersed himself in Dublin's social life, enjoying the theatre, music hall, the after-performance parties, and drink. As their family grew, Herbert and Clara moved to 5 Herbert Park in Ballsbridge, a prosperous area to the southeast of Dublin. Here, Herbert entertained prospective business contacts and hosted poker nights for the likes of Eamon de Valera and Michael Collins, leaders of the Irish Republican Brotherhood.
Gwen remembered her mother being so incensed with Herbert's poker-playing friends that she raised a Union flag in the hall of their new home, saying that anyone who was prepared to walk under it would be welcome in the house. No one declined.
The success of Herbert's import business allowed him to venture into retail. Although unrest in Ireland was on the increase, Herbert heavily invested in a large department store in the centre of Dublin. The Irish War of Independence started in January 1919, just as the store was due to open. Along with other English-owned properties, the uninsured building was burnt to the ground and the family lost much of their wealth.
The guerrilla war in Ireland was, by late 1920, a most serious and bloody conflict. This was vividly brought home to the people of Dublin when Sean Tracy was shot carrying out a raid in Talbot Street. By mid-1920, the police force, the RIC, was reinforced by the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries. At its peak, in late 1921, the combined police establishment was about 15,000, to which must be added between 30,000 and 40,000 soldiers of the Crown. The IRA volunteers never had more than about 5,000 on active service at any one time, and for the most part functioned well below that strength. It never had an adequate supply of arms, but it was a tough guerrilla army. Where it felt it necessary, it was ruthless. Ambushes on police and army, led by such flying columns as Tom Barry's in Cork, were carried out with lethal efficiency. Government detectives were systematically executed by a special squad under the command of Michael Collins. Suspected informers and spies were shown little quarter.
The Irish War of Independence had started in January 1919, just 4 months before Bill was born. His younger brother, Clifford, the last of the Hunt boys, was born in 1923. No sooner had the conflict ended in May of that year than a bloody civil war commenced, which would pitch Irishmen against Irishmen for the next 12 months. As an English mother of 6 children in Dublin at the time of the Irish Troubles, along with the increasingly unreliable behaviour of her husband, Clara decided that it was not wise to remain in Dublin. At the time, Gwen remembered that, when shopping, the family had to crouch low and hurry behind sandbag walls set up to protect them from snipers. All came to a head when Clara was handed a revolver for their protection by an officer from the Black and Tans. Gwen said they were so afraid to have the gun that they dropped it off the end of a pier. Herbert and Clara agreed to separate, and the house in Ballsbridge was sold. Herbert stayed in Dublin and moved to 53 Lower Mount Street, a Georgian townhouse closer to his place of work. Clara moved with the children to a Cova house, a Cova Avenue in Blackrock, a coastal suburb south of Dublin.
Cliff remembered his time in Blackrock with fondness. He and Bill were of a similar age. Only 4 years apart, they spent much of their childhood together. He recalled seeing his father only twice. The first time, he arrived in Blackrock to show off a new Rolls-Royce. Cliff remembered sitting in the 2-person dicky seat at the back of the car, with Bill and being driven around. On the second and last time, Herbert arrived at the house to give Bill and Cliff the Cub Scout uniforms he had promised them. Cliff also remembered them both getting into trouble, all because Cliff needed new shoes. Bill was about 10 years old, and he had intended them to walk the 5 miles to their father's work to ask for money. They left home without telling anyone, but were brought home before they could get there. As the 1920s drew to a close, Herbert's gambling and socializing had taken their toll. His drinking had increased to the point where it affected his ability to work. He suffered bouts of delirium and was prone to hallucinations. Herbert died at his home in Lower Mount Street, aged 48, on Friday the 8th of July, 1932. The cause of death was given as congestion of the lungs with a high temperature for 5 days. As a result, his business almost ceased to function.
With her estranged husband dead, Clara had no income to support herself and her children, let alone pay off the large debts that Herbert had left behind. So she made the decision to take her family back to England. They left Ireland almost penniless, sometime after 1932, leaving most of their possessions behind, and settled at 33 Robin Hood Close in Mitcham, Surrey.
It was from this address that Bill set off in July 1939 to start his training as a wireless operator in the Royal Air Force Bomber Command. He was posted to Middleton St. George, an RAF station near Darlington on the northeast coast of England. He flew as a rear gunner on twin-engined Whitley bombers. Then, from the 4th of April 1941, as the wireless operator and mid-gunner on the larger 4-engined Halifax bombers. Bill completed 12 raids on Germany's industrial heartland in Halifaxes with mixed success. However, on Sunday the 12th of October 1941, he was aboard Halifax L9561 when it took off on its last fateful journey. Their target was a munitions factory in Bremen, Germany. Leopold Fellerer, a German fighter pilot, trailing the bomber, stated in his report,
I had to brake sharply so as to remain behind. I positioned myself around 200 meters below the aircraft, slightly to the right. I climbed steeply to the left and aimed my gun at the enemy's left side, close to the engines. The Halifax began to burn. Realizing the plane could not be saved, pilot Elmer Muttart ordered his crew to bail out. 6 got out okay.
Elmer Muttart successfully flew his burning plane over the village of Once in the Netherlands, but sadly he perished. He was 22 years of age. After landing safely by parachute over Once, Bill was captured by the Germans, along with Reg Alexander, the flight observer, and Leslie Roberts, the flight engineer. They began their 42 months of captivity at Dulag Luft in Frankfurt, an interrogation camp before being moved to Stalag 8B 6 days later. In total, they were interned at 5 camps, including the infamous Stalag Luft 3.
Stalag Luft 3 was one of Germany's largest prisoner-of-war camps. Built near the town of Saargan, the location was chosen to be as far away as possible from neutral countries. This was a maximum security camp designed to deter escape. It held flyers from the Allied air forces and was run by the Luftwaffe.
The desire to get out was a very strong one, because you realised this was going to be your prison for an unknown length of time. That's the thing which horrified me more than anything. This is really the end of life, really. The only consolation was that you've got 2,000 other chaps in the same boat together.
Bill rarely spoke of his time in the prisoner-of-war camps, but in a rare moment he did talk about Douglas Bader, whilst the family watched the film Reach for the Sky one Sunday afternoon. In the film, Bader was given a hero's parting as the Germans transferred him from Stalag Luft 3 to Colditz Castle. Bill pointed out that this did not happen. The prisoners were actually glad to see the back of him, as his attempts at escape had caused suffering for the whole camp. His long years of captivity ended in 1945 with the winter forced march ahead of the advancing Soviet troops. On the evening of the 27th of January, the German High Command ordered an immediate evacuation of the camp and its destruction. Over 10,000 prisoners, most of whom were malnourished through years of meager rationing, hurriedly packed whatever they could and made ready to leave. In his 1945 wartime log, Bill wrote,
"After covering 18 kilometers, finally approached our destination. A very keen Mosquito pilot decides to strafe us. Fires a few bursts, but does too tight a turn and crashes. No one hurt in the column."
On that first day, trudging hour after hour with only 10-minute stops in one of the coldest winters in living memory, they were marched 34 kilometers and finally rested in barns in the village of Leip. Bill wrote,
"Reached our sleeping quarters at 1 a.m. 500 men to a barn. Feldweber must have been a sardine packer. Proceeded to scrape around for food. Came across the farmer's spud and carrot store. Borrowed a few, don't know when I can pay back."
Thousands of the malnourished Allied prisoners of war perished during these harsh months. Luckily, Bill survived.
On the 1st of September 1939, war was declared shortly before Audrey's 12th birthday.
On the same day that Germany invaded Poland, large-scale evacuation procedures were taking place across Britain. The threat of German bombing of British towns and cities was imminent, and Britain was prepared. The choice facing parents to send their children on a train into the unknown did not come easily, but the option to keep them at home was even worse.
Audrey Georgina, or Tid as she was sometimes known, was born on the 14th of December 1926. She and her half-brother Reg lived with their parents, George and Kate Austin, in Elam. a small Kentish village not far from Canterbury. Aude's greatest memory of these early days was the village preparations for the annual visitation of the hop pickers, who arrive by train, mostly from the East End of London.
Hop pickers come from the nearest big towns, London, Canterbury and Dover. Farmers have built camps of corrugated iron sheds near the gardens, and all families come out of the towns to work in the country. In the camps, there is one hut to each family, and the whole affair is a kind of picnic. Great fun so long as the weather is good. Here is a garden ready for the pickers, and across the lane is a garden where picking is in full swing. The hop vines are pulled down. This boy has stripped for the job. One dog has come up picking, and not far away, a 2-year-old thinks the whole business is a kind of game. The pickers empty their baskets into their own big basket at the end of the row. This basket is marked by a card on which the picker's name is written. Every hour or two, men come round and empty the big baskets into sacks. Tallyman marks on the card that the basket has been emptied, and at the end of the week, the picker is paid for the number of baskets full marked on the card.
Aude remembered Kate being busy all day, making tea and taking the hot urns to the pickers to keep them well watered. At some stage, the family moved from Elam to Folkestone, where Kate had grown up. There, although George was a working plumber, he and Kate ran a boarding house offering rooms to full-board lodgers. Audrey's morning task before school was to churn cream into butter, which she carried out in the back garden in all weathers. She also had to make frequent trips to the docks to buy fat herrings, which Kate smoked to make kippers for the lodgers' breakfasts. With the German army only 25 miles away across the English Channel, Folkestone was considered a dangerous place to live, so it was decided that all the town's children were to be evacuated.
Within 48 hours of war, 1 million children were miles away from their homes in the comparative safety of the reception areas.
George and Kate made the decision to have Aude billeted with a family in Green Street Green, a village 59 miles from Folkestone. In 1940, Adolf Hitler ordered reprisals for what was a token air raid on Berlin by the Allies. The blitzkrieg that followed was a bombing campaign on London, starting in September that year and increasing in intensity through to May 1941. German planes which had been unable to attack would release their unexploded bombs on their return journey, sometimes close to Green Street Green. It became apparent that it was more dangerous than Folkestone, so her parents brought her home as it had become safer once the Germans abandoned their plans to invade England. By 1942, George's work brought the family to Surrey, where they rented the first-floor flat at 62 Nightingale Road, Carshalton. That same year, Aude, now 15, started work as a tracer at Philips Electronics, Mitcham Works in Hackbridge. She also started her first year at Croydon Polytechnic, studying mechanical engineering, a 4-year ordinary national certificate course.
In 1946, having made a full recovery after his ordeal in Germany, Bill returned to work at Philips, continuing his training as a work-study engineer. Here he met Aude. Although they dated for a short while, their relationship didn't become serious until Aude's dad, George, died. Being the only one that Aude knew who had a car, Bill was asked to help the family by driving her around with Kate and Reg and assist with all the funeral arrangements. In July 1947, Aude and Kate were staying with family in Folkestone after George's funeral. On the 3rd, Bill wrote,
Dear Aude, firstly, forgive my writing in pencil. You see, I am writing this at work during one of my less busy times. I was very glad to get your letter. I am glad you got the skirt, but it would do her good. I would like to have been able to go down and fetch you back, but the petrol position is none too healthy. I also have to spend the weekend on painting the car. As you know, I did have a lovely time down at Folkestone. Especially the walk and talk we had. I would like to write a lot more. All my love. Bill.
As the 1940s drew to a close, Aud and Bill became engaged. Aud left Phillips and was given a mantel clock as a parting gift. She then concentrated on plans for the wedding that had been set for July. Like the rest of England, Surrey experienced a heatwave that month. The wedding was held on Saturday the 25th at St Mary's Church in Beddington near Carshalton. Aud was given away by Reg, standing in for their father George, who had died 2 years earlier. After the ceremony, a reception supper was held for relatives and friends at Kate's first-floor flat.
As 1950 moves in, it brings us to the halfway mark of the 20th century. The century of the common man. The century of the atom bomb. The century that in half its lifespan has already brought 2 world wars. The eve of its half-centenary found the free-thinking nations placing their faith in strength to prevent a third.
We need to recapture the feeling that we are one people. One people. When crisis threatens a clear cause like Dunkirk, we wade in work to the armpits and find new strength in work. When the enemy is silhouetted and the danger is seen for sure and the sirens wail at sundown, there's nothing we won't endure.
Among the gloom, there was also a lighter side. After a decade of darkness, Britain got lit up. Prince Charles of Edinburgh came the pictures of the year. They were taken at Windlesham Moor, where Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip spent some happy days with the world's most famous baby before naval duties called the Duke to Malta. Pre-election year had kicked off favourably. After nearly 8 years on coupons, clothes came off the ration. Yet there was no rush to buy, for rationing was there in a more telling form: money. Good news number 2 came with a sticky end of sweet rationing. For 9 years, mouths had watered for this great day. To a troubled nation, relief came in an unexpected form. The weather, that most popular of British institutions, was honoured with a heatwave label. Millions sweltered, and summer's password was just Hugh. Of the men of Amethyst, there came a reminder of Britain's great destiny. For these men represented the countless thousands who all over the world are upholding Britain's name. It is they, the nameless heroes, who will keep up this country's proud history. Placing its faith in the ordinary people, Britain bravely faces 1950.